My name is Sonny Assu. I'm Ligwilda'xw Kwakwaka'wakw. I'm currently residing in Campbell River, unceded Ligwilda'xw territory. And I am here today to talk to you about the pieces that I've done for the Open Space Gallery for the project called Awakening Memory with Marianne Nicolson and lessLIE. This work that I'm presenting comes in two folds. It's a sculptural piece and a print-based work. The sculptural piece is based on a project I started a couple years ago called The Value of What Goes on Top. And it investigates the use of traditional materials and investigates the wealth inherent to those materials. And it speculates the uncolonized nature of memory and how a person from a pre-colonial era or a person with expressed memory or knowledge of a pre-colonial era would view and understand what we elevate to the status of art. So I'm presenting simple museum plinths, but constructed out of maple with copper leaf tops. And the copper and maple are both signifiers of wealth for a number of Northwest Coast peoples, specifically the Kwakwaka'wakw in terms of copper. So I'm speculating that these pre-colonial people or this pre-colonial understanding would see the objects that are holding up the artwork as the objects that hold the wealth themselves as opposed to the artworks.
I mean, I usually see this stuff in mason jars. I've got a jar in my freezer. It's just in a mason jar, so it's definitely just using the materials at hand to give this stuff away. I'm assuming that traditionally this would be stored in some kind of cedar container, but through trade and ceremony, through potlatch and just that kind of act of trade and giving away, at this time, like the turn of the century, people would have used all these objects just to distribute this stuff. And I don't think that the Listerine bottle itself might have been considered ironic for the day. I mean, I don't know. I'd have to try and communicate with the ancestors somehow to see if there was any humor involved in choosing these things, or if they just happened to be what was around and that's what they used.
Yeah, so we're going to email you these two.
But I wouldn't put it past them. I mean, the conversations I've had with my grandmother before she passed about our language and culture, there's a deep sense of humor ingrained into some of the language, and it could definitely be something that was thought of.
I have another print-based project that I've been working on called the Paradise Syndrome, which the Paradise Syndrome, the title itself, stems from an episode of Star Trek where Kirk and the crew find this planet that's inhabited by quote-unquote Native Americans. And they were removed from Earth by an alien race called the Preservers and placed on this other planet far away from their home territories. And there they were able to live and thrive, never knowing the effects of colonization.
There's an Emily Carr painting of the village of Cape Mudge, which is my home village. And this painting was done before Chief Sonny Assu, in the name of progress, tore down his longhouse as a way to what I've come to understand is not to assimilate, but to adopt colonial culture as a way to try and better his people for the continued colonization and occupation of our territories. I mix it up with Star Trek, and the Marianne is the colloquial name of the planet from the original series, where Kirk and Spock and McCoy beam down this planet and they find what looks like to be Native Americans.
And what I've done with this specific series, I've taken chart book scans from chart books, marine chart books that I found that my grandfather had given to me or I'd gotten after he passed away. And these chart books were just used by fishermen and marine navigators to figure out where they're going along the coast. I scanned them in at high resolution and then scaled them up and did these digital interventions on top. And I placed Indigenous iconography from the Northwest Coast, phone line design elements and shapes of copper on top of these charts to place the Indigenous presence back on the land, because the Indigenous presence on the land was fairly erased from these charts. But as you zero in through the charts, as they're blown up larger than average, you get to see markations, colonial markations on the land for the reserves that were left over for the Indigenous peoples from the areas. And the original charts that I did were all Kwakwaka'wakw locations. And so we see all these little tiny plots of land that were set aside by the colonial government for my people. And what I did there is I took those colonial plots of land and cut them out of the copper shapes that you can see within these images that I've created to, in essence, shame the government for their actions against our peoples.
I'm also just really drawn to the age of the bottle and the wealth of this oil. I'm not really talking about this kind of work specifically in the pieces I'll be producing for the exhibit, but I'm just really fascinated by it. And the colors are really wonderful too. Like, it's got this, I mean, you definitely wouldn't want to eat this, but just this kind of amber color there is really beautiful, and the way that it mixes with the yellow of the sediment of the oil itself is nice.